If you feel like you're doing everything right, but fat loss still feels impossible, you're probably just doing the same mistakes I did for years. I spent so long stuck in the binge-restrict cycle because I just did not know what I was actually doing wrong. Now, after losing 13 kilos, I want to show you the 6 mistakes that held me back the most. And the bonus mistake in the end explains why you always fall off track every time that something does not go to plan. So the first thing that I did completely wrong is that I treated my fat loss like a short project. I did resets and quick fixes and 2 to 3 weeks of doing everything perfectly, sticking to it with a no fault, but then just kind of falling off. I also expected fast drops of weight and weekly perfection and also instant changes. I was just hoping that everything would go very quickly if I just focused on it and did everything perfectly. But the only thing that happened is that I just burned out. Usually I had huge expectations, which then would lead to burnout, and after a few months I was right back where I started. And since I pushed myself so hard, I always went from one extreme to another. I was either losing weight or not doing that and binging and restarting constantly and never having a moment where I felt good with myself. And then when results weren't fast enough, I panicked or I just quit because I thought it wasn't worth it if I wasn't seeing fast results. But what I realized is, yes, a year is long, but 10 years of failed diets is even longer. I always thought that the quick fixes would actually be quick, would get me to the result that I wanted, would get me to the place that I wanted. But ultimately, that didn't happen. What happened was me restarting every single time and feeling like I have failed for 10 years. But what I never tried was doing something sustainable, sticking to it for a long time, like months or a year, because fat loss does take that long. Actual sustainable fat loss that stays takes a while. And I'd rather stick to something for at least a year instead of failing again for another 10 years. Because honestly, my progress only became constant and sustainable when I slowed down and when I stopped caring when I would get to my result and instead just cared about what I was doing in the day-to-day and making sure that that was something that I could be doing for such a long time or even forever. Now, another mistake I used to make was finding myself to Google things like, why do I have cravings? How do I stop them? Then I skipped breakfast in hope of eating less and pushed my hunger away. I basically tried to fix my hunger with rules instead of actual food. But ultimately, that just backfired into undereating, which then led into binging and restricting and having that whole cycle going on for such a long time in my life. Then skipping breakfast led me to overeat later in the day or at night and not feeling in control around food, always thinking that I was failing when in fact I just did not set myself up for success. But what I realized is hunger is not the villain. It's information about what you should do next. Cravings are usually just unmet needs that you want to suppress with food. And they do not mean that you lack discipline. You just also need to broaden your toolbox of things that you do when you don't feel good. And of course, not every craving is an unmet need, but they do happen more often when you do not know how to regulate yourself in a different way, which is not with food. But basically, how I resolved this is that when I regulated my hunger, when I ate consistent meals and added protein to all of my meals, but especially breakfast, then cravings and just in general my hunger, then everything else stabilized as well and made weight loss so much easier. Now be honest with yourself, do you usually wait for motivation to start with your new fat loss journey or weight loss journey and then stop as soon as motivation fades? Because that was literally me. I thought that motivation had to be there all the time, or that I would stop as soon as it was gone because it was not exciting anymore. I was not interested in it anymore because after a while, motivation fades. It's not exciting when you do not see progress immediately. You do not have that hit of dopamine when you step on the scale or when you're doing it for a long time, because that's what's supposed to happen. Fat loss and weight loss, it's not supposed to be exciting all the time. It's actually pretty boring. You're just doing the same few things every single day, and what actually gives you results is not the excitement, it's the boring little stuff and repeating that over and over. It's consistency. It's literally the basics. And when you do them over and over again, of course, they become boring. They become like your routine, which is, it's good in one way because they become somewhat more automatic, but only after you accept that it's gonna be boring. It's not really gonna be exciting. It's just something that's supposed to fit into your life pretty well. And you're supposed to be able to maintain it for a long time because it's boring, because it's easy, because it's not something that should take up your whole headspace or even time. So what I realized is that progress means being consistent even on your lowest days, even when you don't want to, even when it gets boring in the gym or with what you eat. Like, sure, it should be satisfying what you eat and what you do. In another video, I mentioned that your meals should be at least a 7 out of 10 satisfying every single time. You should honestly aim for that. They shouldn't be boring in how they taste, like that they're bland, but they should be kind of boring because maybe you have a few of the same things, or it's not always a new recipe, and you're not going to be spending hours in the kitchen trying new things, because honestly, that's just exhausting and you're not going to be able to keep it up. But it's repetition that creates results, not new things over and over. Before I actually made progress with my weight loss, I had such complicated rules that I had to follow with like perfect macros and then meal timing or not eating a whole food group like carbs and not having sweets and just complicating everything unnecessarily. Then I also overthought every tiny decision. I was like, is this the right decision? Is that going to be healthy? Is it going to help me lose weight? Oh no, I did something wrong. I have to overcorrect now and not eat as much in the next meal. My brain was just going crazy with thoughts, basically, and feeling bad and analyzing everything in a very judgmental way. But that honestly backfired because having so many choices and overthinking everything, it leads to decision fatigue, which then makes you unable to choose anything afterwards. And that's even worse because when you have to overthink things that actually don't really need that much thought, you then can't make decisions that are actually important, like, for example, staying in a calorie deficit and just having that as your most important thing when trying to lose weight. I also got overwhelmed so quickly and went right into my binge-restrict cycle and felt honestly horrible about myself that whole time. And I think having so many rules just made me mentally so exhausted from trying to be consistent and trying to lose weight. But what I realized is that overthinking is not discipline, it's self-sabotage, honestly, because healthy enough is healthy. You do not have to be 100% healthy to lose weight. You do not have to overthink on small little food decisions that you make, because they honestly only lead you to going off track because you feel like you've messed up. The only thing that is actually important and actually determines if you do lose weight or not is if you're in a caloric deficit. And everything else is just the cherry on top. Of course, protein maybe is the second thing that is kind of foundational, because that's going to determine your body composition and losing more fat than muscle. But everything else, if I'm being honest, it's really just personal preference, because simplicity means that it's going to be sustainable and you're going to be able to stick to it. For example, my routine or my few foundational things that I do are being in a calorie deficit, eating enough protein, which is around 30 grams per meal, And then I have a few meals that I rotate that I really like, that are easy to make, and I just kind of reintegrate them every week into my week and maybe change up the protein ones, change up the carbs, but more or less they're kind of the same and I really like them. I do not get tired of them this way. Then usually I only work out 3 times a week and everything else is optional. So these simple routines literally made fat loss easy for me. Something I really thought was necessary to lose weight was to feel miserable. I don't know why I thought this, but I thought it had to be really hard. I always had to feel awful while doing it and be strict with myself and just not enjoy it, basically. But as long as you think that suffering is going to mean that you're going to make progress, that is always going to lead to burnout. Because for me, restriction led into rebellion and not wanting to do it, wanting to eat outside of my plan, which then led into my binge cycle and doing that, eating everything out of my plan that I deemed as unhealthy and thought that I could not have. So I just went all in. I thought, well, if I already messed up, I might as well just eat everything that I'm not allowed to eat, because tomorrow I'm going to have to stick to my horrible plan again that I hate. But as soon as I stopped looking at it as something that has to be horrible and something that actually needs to fit into my life, be sustainable long term, and be enjoyable, that's when I started seeing progress and actually was able to stick to it. In my first few times of trying to lose weight, I also almost exclusively relied on my willpower. I tried to force myself through things that I didn't want to do and always thought that I would make the right decision once I had to make it. But relying only on willpower is gonna be very hard, because there are gonna be times where you won't feel like you want to maybe go to the gym or stick to your plan. But first of all, if your plan is sustainable, that's much less likely to happen, but it will still happen sometimes. So you kind of need to build systems instead of just relying on willpower. You need to build habits and make them so sustainable that you can actually stick to them, and that you repeat them so often that it becomes literally automatic. For example, Wednesday is your gym day and you're going to go exactly at 9 a.m. You're going to leave your house at 8:45, and that's just like an appointment which you can't say no to. Of course, if you're sick, if something comes up, I'm not talking about this here. But it's just about the times where you just feel unmotivated. If you just literally go on autopilot, if you can go on autopilot at some point and reprogram yourself to just do it and think about if you want to do it afterwards, then it's going to become so much easier. But even with systems, people fall apart for one overlooked reason, which brings me to my last bonus mistake. If you do not plan for low energy days, or days where you do not want to do anything, then your plan is going to fall apart. You need to know that those days are going to happen, and you need to know what you're going to do when it happens. So have a plan ready. Maybe even make a plan for when you feel low energy, when you feel high energy, and when you feel just normal energy, so that you can adapt and you can say, okay, I don't feel great today. I can still go for a walk, because that is low effort for me and it still feels like I'm progressing and doing something for my goals. For example, something I've started to do is meal prepping. And more than meal prepping for a whole week, what I've tried to do is just meal prepping one meal. For example, for me, that's a burrito, which I love. It's amazing, it's easy, and I just make a batch of 10 burritos and put them all in the freezer, because if you put them in the freezer, they're going to hold so much longer and you don't have to eat them every single day like you would if you'd put them in the fridge. Because I like to eat maybe, 1 or 2 per week. They're just for those days where I just do not want to think about what to make for lunch or for dinner, and just having something easy to grab, put in the microwave for 5 minutes, and it's just ready. So plan for those days, plan ahead, and then do this on your high energy days when you have a lot of motivation and a lot of energy. Prep for your low energy days and figure out what works for you, because this is why systems matter. It's not for the days where everything goes well and everything feels easy. It's for the days where it feels hard and when you do not want to do it. And just having things on hand that make your life easier in those moments is exactly what's going to keep you going. But honestly, like you probably saw, the real turning point for me wasn't just one moment. It was several small things that helped me get to the point where I am now. And honestly, the biggest thing is that I stopped trying to be perfect. Because over time, those tiny little decisions and tiny little choices started shaping my life in a way that made fat loss possible and doable for the first time. So you're not the problem. The perfection that you've been chasing is. And if you want to understand the root of staying consistent, the part that nobody talks about, you can watch the video that's going to pop up on the screen right now, because in that video I explain everything about how I finally became consistent. I really hope that this helped you and that I see you in my next video. Bye!